I think all Jews should be Jewish first, and then based on their Jewish values, vote accordingly. We can't talk about any of those issues if we are dead. If American Jews are being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza, if American Jews are being physically assaulted on campuses, so yeah, the climate change and the abortion and immigration, those are important issues. But it's so secondary when it comes to the existential issues facing the Jewish community. For the first time in American Jewish history, American Jews should vote for our self-interests. The fact that the very first people calling for the eradication of the Jewish state, the first people calling for an intifada, the first people celebrating the rape of Jewish women, were people I allied myself with and marched for and voted for, that to me became irrefutable proof that I can no longer be part of that coalition.
With me today in the studio, firebrand Shabbos Kestenbaum. I'm not going to give him a title because he does so many incredible things. Shabbos, welcome to Israel. Again, welcome to Jerusalem. And welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Shabbos, I have to tell you, I had such joy watching you take Jackson Hinkle and just making, as we would say in my family, mincemeat out of him.
Yeah.
How was that?
I appreciate you saying that. I'll be debating him again next week. His team reached out.
Wonderful.
And I already know my opening statement, which is to say last week I called you, Jackson, someone with the intellectual capabilities of a folding chair. And I want to apologize. I meant no disrespect to folding chairs. This is someone who really makes our job so easy because it's such a gift that our ideological adversaries are people like Jackson Hinkle, who quite literally are living in Russia to escape federal investigations for providing material support to terrorist organizations.
I mean, wasn't he at Nasrallah's funeral?
Correct.
And in Yemen?
Correct. He was at Nasrallah's funeral in Lebanon. He was in Yemen where he gave an address to the Houthis. He met with Iraqi militias in Iraq. And so he and sort of this woke right, or he's not really woke right, he's an actual communist. They will say that we Zionists were getting paid $7,000 by Bibi to post some pro-Israel Hezbollah.
Where did that $7,000 come from?
Yeah, it was based on a report by this young person who totally did not understand the data that he was looking at.
Right.
So he sort of made an assumption at the end of those numbers by saying, well, if you aggregate the amount, it's close to $7,000 per person.
Meanwhile, nobody got anything.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, let me say full disclosure, if Israel wants to pay me $7,000, I will gladly take it. I mean, I live in a very crappy one-bedroom apartment in LA, so I'm waiting for my APAC check to come in, but they don't.
Absolutely. I have the same feeling. You know, somebody wrote to me the other day, you paid shill. I'm like, no, I do it for free.
I wish I was a paid shill.
I wish. Exactly. We're aspiring. So, but this, you know, we're joking and you are really an incredible debater. I've seen you also on Peers, where you debate, honestly, the most stupid and debased people. And, you know, I was in that kind of cycle for a while. How are you still doing it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I recognize that most of the pro-Israel Jewish advocacy space, they're not really going on that show for reasons I completely understand. And it's funny because I'm based in LA. So when we film the Piers Morgan show, it's about 7 a.m. my time.
Morning, yeah.
And I'll wake up and they'll say, oh, Shabbos, you're a baby killer. You love genocide. I'm like, I just freaking woke up. What do you want from me?
Haven't even had a coffee.
So look, I think the show is soul crushing, but at the same time, Piers Morgan has more weekly listeners than there are Jews on planet Earth. Really? So for us to surrender that space, I think is incredibly short-sighted. And I wish I didn't have to do it, but as the ethics of our father say, b'makom she'ein anashim yishal yosish, when there's a place where there are people, you know, strive to be a person. So in my little small way, this is how I can contribute to the pro-Israel space. And we're lucky in the sense that we have facts on our side. We have logic on our side.
Truth.
We have truth. We're not the ones who are propping up a dictatorial, tyrannical regime that murders 13-year-old boys and throws gays off of roofs. That is on the other side to explain why they not only defend but celebrate that type of jihadi cult. We don't. We believe in democracy, in Western civilization, and perhaps most fundamentally, we actually believe in peace. So Absolutely. The job, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's a lot more easy than the other side.
Well, I think, like you said, when you're armed with the truth, and I feel like that, I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission as a warrior of the Jewish people to tell the truth when we've been for thousands of years libeled, maligned, and we're just going through another iteration of what our people have gone through. And we are the communication warriors this time around.
Exactly. And I think to use this iteration, if the current iteration of anti-Semitism are individuals who quite literally burn American flags, who call for the eradication of Western civilization, which again is quite literally what they do, people like Mahmoud Khalil, then it kind of makes the case for us. So when I speak to non-Jewish Americans, whether it be in a political space, whether it be in a religious space, I say, look, forget about Israel just for a moment. These are individuals who hate the West, and you don't have to take my word for it. Just listen to the things coming out of their mouths.
But the Jews are always the canary in the mine, though, aren't we?
Exactly.
We're always, a society starts to unravel when they start coming for us. I mean, we've seen it in history. We've seen it everywhere.
Correct. And that's why I'm very appreciative to the policymakers we have on both sides of the aisle. I mean, I think it is skewered towards one side, but there are policymakers who recognize this, that what starts with the Jews does not end with the Jews. And on a personal level, as I know you do as well, you have many relationships with the Christian American community. We've both spoken at the Christians United for Israel Summit. There are good, God-fearing, God-loving Christians or even non-believers who believe that what happens with the Jews does not end with the Jews. They care about the preservation of Western hegemony in the Middle East, and they very proudly support Israel because they believe in America first. And America first does not mean America alone. It means protecting and preserving American interests both at home and abroad.
Absolutely. And that brings me to talking to you about your own kind of political evolution. I understand that you'll be speaking at the Republican Jewish Coalition the coming week, and I'm very happy that your voice is there. You started off as a diehard Democrat. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yes. Well, first, let me embarrass myself to set the scene for a moment. I was 9 years old when I was knocking on doors for then presidential candidate Barack Obama.
Wow.
I was 12 when I was volunteering for the Cory Booker campaign when he was running for Senate the first time. I was 16 at the Democratic Convention in 2016. I volunteered for the Jamal Bowman campaign in Ohio. I marched with Black Lives Matter. I marched at the Supreme Court when Roe v. Wade was overturned. So I have some degree of legitimacy or credibility when I say I can compare my progressive credentials to most Jews and really to most Americans any day of the week.
And all this as an Orthodox Jew.
All this as an Orthodox Jew. And that was also something I was never really able to articulate or rationalize, how I can have relatively conservative religious principles while at the same time being fairly politically liberal. My cop-out was essentially, well, the two are separate. I don't believe that anymore. I think my religion very much influences my politics. And I think all Jews should be Jewish first, and then based on their Jewish values, vote accordingly.
But I also think that the word liberal has been hijacked.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's Ronald Reagan said this in the 80s. I did not leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left me. So I still believe, for example, in strong federal measures to combat climate change. I believe in a $15 minimum wage. I believe in a woman's right to make her own reproductive choices. I also believe, and this is fundamental, we can't talk about any of those issues if we are dead. If American Jews are being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza, if American Jews are being physically assaulted on campuses. So yeah, the climate change and the abortion and immigration, those are important issues, but it's so secondary when it comes to the existential issues facing the Jewish community. And that was my paradigm shift, whereby for the first time in American Jewish history, American Jews should vote for our self-interests.
Absolutely. Did this happen to you when you got to Harvard, when you kind of woke up before?
No. This when I went to Harvard, I was still essentially a socialist, and I joined clubs, not necessarily because I supported it, but I wanted to understand their side, like the Jews for Palestine Liberation. I went to their meetings and I attended their programs. The paradigm shift for me was October 7th, I think, like most American Jews, because I always say this, and people find it controversial, but I'm not sure why. The story of October 7th is not October 7th, because Hamas is a dictatorial, tyrannical regime that should be obliterated, but they're very clear as to what their goals are. I mean, you could read their charter in English.
Their charter has genocide in it.
Exactly. They call for the eradication of the Jew from the
genocide.
So when terrorists commit acts of terrorism, it's bad, but definitionally they are terrorists. It's what they do. The story of October 7th is October 8th, because what we as American Jews, especially as liberal American Jews, could have never conceived of as possible was the most elite, the most progressive, those who literally introduced themselves with preferred gender pronouns, who took knees for Black Lives Matter on the night of October 7th, as they're watching the images in real time of Jewish women like Naama Levy bleeding from her private areas, as they're watching the images of Kfir and Ariel Bibas, babies, being hoarded onto motorcycles by strangers and deported into Gaza. The immediate reaction of 34 student groups at Harvard was to jump out of bed, some were still in their pajamas, to draft what they called an emergency statement to blame Jews for October 7th. And that's when I realized, as much as I agree with the climate change and all that, the fact that the very first people calling for the eradication of the Jewish state, the first people calling for an intifada, the first people celebrating the rape of Jewish women were people I allied myself with and marched for and voted for, that to me became irrefutable proof that I can no longer be part of that coalition.
But Shabbos, before October 7th, you're a Jew walking around campus with a kippah, you're in a divinity school, and you never felt any type of discrimination even before that? Because I've been feeling discrimination on campus. I mean, I'm not on campus, but when I've gone to speak at campuses, it's been happening for a while now. It's not new.
No, correct. I definitely did feel discrimination before October 7th.
Right.
And your listeners can read our lawsuit. It's online against
Yeah.
Harvard.
Yeah,
and it does detail specific incidents that happened before October 7th.
Right.
But it was sort of what I call this genteel anti-Semitism, an anti-Semitism that you can plausibly deny, that you can sort of sweep under the rug and pretend isn't there.
Pretend that it's anti-Zionism.
Exactly. And then once October 7th happens, it just became naked, unvarnished anti-Semitism. And honestly, the best advocate for Jewish students was former Harvard President Claudine Gay, because when she testified on live TV under oath in front of Congress numerous times that you could in fact call for the genocide of Jews depending on the context. And meanwhile, Harvard was ranked by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expressions 248th out of 248 American universities when it came to their commitments to free speech.
Wow.
And all of a sudden she's saying, well, you could call for genocide because we believe in free speech. She became the best advocate for Jews because now I didn't have to make the case anymore, because I said even our own president is acknowledging that Jews are treated qualitatively different than every other minority group. So as I said with Jackson Hinkle, my job became a lot easier because you don't have to take my word for it. Just listen to what Harvard administrators are saying.
And so October 8th, you see this incredibly brutal and cruel reaction around you. You're in Harvard. And then you think to yourself, if this is the Democratic Party, if these are the people who call themselves Democrat, that's not who I am. How do you then make that shift? Because you became actually almost like a poster child for the Republican campaign for Trump,
right?
After being the probably less outspoken poster child for the Democrats.
Which is why my fiercest critics will always say that I'm simply a tool and I'm a prop for the Republicans to weaponize anti-Semitism. And every time I would testify before Congress or give a speech or whatever, I would always have those detractors saying you're just being used as a pawn. And I would tell them, let's say you're right and I am being used as a pawn. So tell me, what is the alternative? Every time I testified before Congress, I never made it political. I thanked Democrats just as much as Republicans. When I spoke at the Republican National Convention, I initially told them no because I didn't want to make it political.
Right.
I didn't want to speak. And your listeners can watch my speech. I don't even endorse Trump in that speech, much to the chagrin of the Trump campaign, who were very upset at me for doing that.
Really?
I tried for basically 9 months to get my own party to get out of their own way. We tried organizing roundtables at the White House. We tried getting the president.
So you didn't immediately leave the Democratic Party on October 8th?
No. And by the way,
you tried to kind of see if you could change within and get people to wake up.
Correct. And by the way, I'm still a registered Democrat. You know, I just voted for Andrew Cuomo in the New York City mayoral elections. But people may not know this. On the first-year anniversary of October 7th, when we went to the grave of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, with President Trump, Kamala Harris was invited, and she said no. And then she was invited to come a separate time just to pray for the American hostages with the families of American hostages without Donald Trump being there. And she said no again. I went to the Democratic Convention, and I told them, fine, don't have me speak because I'm a MAGA fascist. I gave them a list of a dozen young progressive Jewish students on college campuses who were probably going to vote for Kamala Harris. Right. And I said, have one of them for 2 minutes speak about anti-Semitism, because you should not let the Republicans be the only ones to talk about this issue. And they said no. So if my party is refusing to make basic political concessions to a major constituency in the United States, that's their prerogative. But then why would we support you?
Absolutely.
And if people hate Donald Trump or love Donald Trump, the fact that Donald Trump received 45% of the New York Jewish vote, 40% of Pennsylvania and Ohio Jewish vote, that's a really good thing, because it shows the American Jewish community is not a monolith. And if you want to win elections in the future, which I'm not convinced Democrats do, but I digress, if you want to win elections in the future, you have to create political concessions to Jewish Americans in the same way you already do for Black Americans and gay Americans and so on. Jews should be treated the exact same as any other political demographic in the United States.
Absolutely. But I think I read somewhere that's what Obama kind of succeeded in, that not supporting Israel still got him the Jewish vote and still got him the Jewish funders, the Jewish, people who contributed to his campaign. And I think that this last election was dramatic in the sense that Jews, like you just said, are saying, hang on, what is the interest of our community? Because we've been fighting for everybody else. But what about us?
Exactly. And that's why even when I was supporting Bernie Sanders, for example, I knew he was anti-Israel and I didn't like his policies vis-a-vis the Middle East. But my sort of rationalization was, well, it's sort of inconsequential because Israel is a strong Western country. And if he cuts off foreign aid, well, who really cares because they don't kind of need it. And then October 7th happens and you realize that rightly or wrongly, Israel does rely on American support. It does require those B-2 bombers, for example, to take out Iranian nuclear sites. So that's when I started to realize, as did I would say millions of American Jews, that the support for Israel that we did not think was that consequential is actually incredibly consequential.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump received 35% of the Jewish vote, which may not sound like
35,
a lot. 35.
But it's a shift from what, 20?
Exactly. That is the most votes of any Republican nominee since Ronald Reagan.
Wow. That's incredible. So now let's talk about a painful subject within the Republican Party or within the MAGA movement. And that is, maybe it's not new, maybe it's been brewing for a while, but this woke right, this anti-Israel, anti-Jewish. I would even venture to say, and I've said it before, that I really truly believe that somebody like Tucker Carlson is trying to bring back medieval Christian anti-Semitism.
Correct. And it's easy to talk about Tucker Carlson's anti-Semitism because it's so unvarnished.
Obvious.
But it's not just the anti-Semitism. He had, for example, Daryl Cooper on his podcast, who's a discredited historian, to legitimize the theory that the Americans were actually wrong to have fought the Nazis in World War II. They really should have fought the Stalinists and the Soviet Union. That was the true enemy. So it's not just the hatred of the Jew. It's this hatred of Western civilization and our own American history, which is why he consistently brings on guests to scorn the American government, to scorn the Trump administration. And that's what makes this so not just ironic, but so frustrating, because they will accuse us of not supporting the MAGA agenda. They will accuse us of not supporting President Trump. Meanwhile, they truly believe that Donald Trump is covering up a child sex ring by refusing to release the Epstein files. They believe that Trump is beholden to an 85-year-old. I don't know how old Miriam Adelson is. She looks great for her age, but whoever old Miriam Adelson is, he's in her pocket. They actually have no belief and no faith or trust in Donald Trump. So I voted for Trump. I registered voters for Trump. I spoke at Trump rallies. I did a hell of a lot to get Donald Trump elected. What did you guys do? What did the Nick Fuenteses and Candace Owens? All they have done is fractured the Republican Party and fractured the conservative movement by spewing conspiracy theories that have no holding in reality, and instead demoralize young Americans, particularly young American men, to have zero trust in conservative principles to uplift them from whatever hole is afflicting them in their lives.
And how big do you think this phenomenon is?
I'll put it this way, it's getting bigger.
Really?
That's for sure. I think it was, again, as much as I support Donald Trump, I'm also very objective that I call balls and strikes. And it was abhorrent to me that the Vice President, J.D. Vance, 2 days after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, hosts Charlie's show and then brings on Tucker Carlson as his guest.
That was the first
correct. That was his
show.
Correct. It bothers me to no end that Charlie Kirk, who was a friend, who was a leader, who was such a great person for so many reasons.
Yes.
He had said repeatedly that he would not ever entertain Nick Fuentes being part of the conservative movement, not just because politically he's not a conservative, but this conspiratorial thinking, this victimhood mentality that it's all the Jews, that, they're the reason for our problem.
Yeah.
I don't want to entertain someone like that. And then Tucker Carlson has him on for a 2-hour interview where he just peddles softball questions and compliments Nick's intelligence. That to me is incredibly destructive. And should the Republican Party lose in 2028, it will be a result of these far-right nefarious actors who are on the fringes of political discourse having a footing in the Republican Party, because the majority of the American people are moderates. They don't like this conspiratorial way of thinking, and we need leadership in the Republican Party who is willing to effectively and articulately and publicly call it out.
But then when you see that a couple of weeks ago, President Trump was here, went to the Knesset, gave a 1.5 hour incredible speech. Half of it was a stand-up comedy show. I mean, I enjoyed it tremendously. I think he's just a fantastic riffer, off-the-cuff speaker. He's just so genuine. He's authentic. He is who he is, and that's how he won. And then you think, there's no doubting where President Trump is on this debate in terms of his support for the Jewish people, his support for Israel. We see what he's done, what he's trying to do on college campuses. We see how he's trying to eject the real horrible people that are harassing students on campus, the ones that are foreign students. I mean, he's really made it very clear. Where does his White House stand on this? Is there already a rotting influence that we should be very concerned about? Or is it still the kooks with podcasts?
So yes and no. First of all, let me just validate that by saying I remember asking Ben Shapiro this very question about the woke right and these nefarious far-right actors. And Ben articulated and elucidated something that is so true, whereby the irony of Trump being called an anti-Semite is he's incredibly philo-Semitic. He really loves Jews.
Loves Jews.
And in his book, The Art of the Deal, which I'm sure he actually wrote, but point being, in The Art of the Deal, he talks about one of the most formative experiences growing up under the feet of his father, Fred Trump, was being at his desk when his father would close these multi-million-dollar business deals with the real estate tycoons of Manhattan, almost all of whom were Orthodox Jews.
Yes.
There are pictures of Donald Trump at the Hasidic Bubavur Yeshiva in Borough Park in like the 1980s.
Yeah.
He genuinely likes Jewish people because he sees us as, yes, historically we've been oppressed and victimized, but we're also incredibly successful and don't define ourselves by our past oppression.
Aspirational, which is what he is and what he stands for.
Exactly. And because the Republican Party today, rightly or wrongly, is essentially, I don't want to use the word cult of personality because that's a bit extreme, but if Donald Trump says that this is part of the Republican ideology, then by virtue of him saying it, it becomes part of the Republican ideology. So because he has such a strong foothold on the party, he's actually been able to keep so many of these nefarious actors at bay. My concern is when Trump is gone in 2028.
Who's coming? Who's
coming? Because you don't have the guardrails that Trump has currently put in place. And again, this is not just pertaining to Israel or anti-Semitism. This is also pertaining to this victimhood mentality, which is why, as I guess I'm sort of a conservative, anti-Semitism is not a conservative value because we believe that the only person who is responsible for the decisions in your life is you. And to simply say that I can't have a successful relationship and I can't get a good paying job and I can't succeed in life is because something the Jews, that's not a conservative value.
No.
That's sort of what the far left does, where they just blame all their problems on systemic racism and this ethereal oppression. No, make something of your life and stop making excuses.
Exactly.
And I see Nick Fuentes being a great example of this as someone who places all of his personal faults and blames on other people who really have no impact on his life.
Yeah. I mean, funniest and saddest thing I saw is him having a conversation with Candace Owens and him saying to her, you know, I was an anti-Semite when it wasn't trendy. No, I was an OG anti-Semite. You guys are just jumping on the bandwagon now. I couldn't believe what I was listening to. I honestly couldn't believe that this is now mainstream, or at least accepted in mainstream American discourse. Yeah. You know, and that's another thing. I'm a European. I grew up in Gibraltar, southern Spain, British territory. I studied in London. And in Europe, we always had kind of an anti-Semitism under the surface feeling. It's always kind of there, but it's quiet. I think that what's been a shock to people like you, and maybe you can explain or disagree with me, is that being American and being Jewish there was never a tension. There was never a contradiction. European and Jewish, there was a bit of a tension. And I think a lot of Americans, especially your generation, are saying, hang on, but I never thought I had to pick a side. I mean, why does this have to be a contradiction? Is that what your feeling is going on?
Correct. I never felt that it was a contradiction. In fact, I felt they were quite complementary. My American identity and my Jewish values, they very much entertained each other. And in fact, I remember speaking at my first Trump rally, and I don't prepare speeches, and as I'm walking up to the podium, I'm kind of thinking, well, a middle-class white Jew who went to Harvard is not exactly a sympathetic story. So what am I going to say that's actually going to convince people that this is a serious issue? And I started my speech by saying in 1790, President George Washington writes a letter to the largest Jewish community in the United States. It was 25 families in Newport, Rhode Island. And he tells them that here in the United States, we are qualitatively different than all other countries. We actually want you, as children of Abraham, to come to our country and practice your faith because in his own words, quote, bigotry will be granted no sanction, and persecution no assistance. And I tell this crowd of, 30, 40,000 people at this Trump rally how shocked and how embarrassed and how appalled would President Washington and President Jefferson and President Madison and our founding fathers be to know that American students, whether they're Jewish or Muslim or Christian, American students are being denied access to education because of their religious identity. So it is a profoundly and uniquely American issue. This strikes at the core of our Western civilization, the heart of our liberal values, and our American democracy. What makes us such an exceptional country, and I will, no offense to your listeners, I will bring down other countries like the UK and France and Canada.
I'm there with you.
Is we are built not just as a country of people, but a country of ideas. We were built upon Judeo-Christian values that has sustained us for close to 250 years. And it is that erosion of Judeo-Christian principles and values that makes me incredibly concerned. And sorry, I give long answers, but last point, why do we care? Why do we care about Harvard and Columbia and all these institutions? It's because these are institutions of higher learning that purport to train the next generation of American leaders. And while I'm not convinced that that will be true in the future, it's certainly been true in the past. It's not exaggeration at all to state, statistically speaking, I probably sat in a room with a future congressman, a future senator, even a future president of the United States.
Yes.
And if these are America's future policymakers, if these are America's future judges and jurors, America's future authors of the books your kids and grandkids will be reading, who don't believe in American exceptionalism, who don't believe in Western civilization, who believe in the erosion of capitalism in favor of socialism, then America is at a dangerous inflection point.
Yes.
So yeah, we can talk about anti-Semitism, and as Jews, we tend to talk about anti-Semitism a lot, but we don't actually have to talk about anti-Semitism as much with the American people.
Yeah.
Just talk about how there is a total erosion of basic American principles that have been the foundational beliefs of our country since its inception. That is a major, major problem.
Yes, I mean, for somebody like me, growing up in Europe, looking at America, the American dream was always, to me, the national ethos. People aspire to that, and now people aspire to or look at failure as something that they will stand behind rather than success, which is really what Trump is all about. But now you've kind of segued very naturally onto the election in New York for the
Yes. That was a good segue.
I saw a really interesting clip of you when some Jews from Mondani showed up at your door, your parents' house. And you were like, if you can tell me what the parash of the week is, then I'll believe that you're Jews from Mondani. What's going on, Shabbos?
Yeah. Well, let me just address that particular episode because I got a lot of crap for it.
Oh, I loved it.
If a stranger is going to come to my door unannounced, uninvited, and say that I'm voting for Zohar Mamdani because of my Jewish values, and you should be voting for Zohar Mamdani because of your Jewish values. If your Jewish values are so central to your political identity, then you should be able to answer a basic question of said Jewish values. And if you can't, it underscores that it's really not your Jewish values. No. It's your political values, and you're simply using Judaism as a scapegoat or as a reflection for those political agendas.
You're tokenizing yourself.
Exactly. So it's not that I'm trying to trip up Jews and trying to create class.
I never saw it like that.
Who's not or isn't Jewish, but it is a very revealing point that Jews for Mamdani are just New Yorkers for Mamdani, and they will conveniently use Judaism as a scapegoat for that.
100%.
In terms of the Mamdanification of New York City, I think it goes hand in hand with what I've been talking about as it pertains to institutions of higher learning, which is this victimhood mentality that the reason you can't afford your rent, the reason you can't have a good paying job is because the billionaires, or it's because of the system, whatever that means. And what's great about socialism is it has a 100-year history of failure.
Absolutely.
And I was a socialist, so I know. Everything, literally every single policy that Zohar Mamdani has proposed has failed in every iteration has ever been tried. I mean, just one quick example. Currently, 48% of all tax revenue collected in New York City comes from the top 1% of earners, 48%. Yes. Zohar Mamdani has gone on record repeatedly saying that in New York City, which is, of course, the financial capital of the world, Absolutely. There shouldn't be billionaires. That's an exact quote, which is ludicrous because the only way any of his sky-high policies will ever actually come into fruition is if you actually have billionaires. So it's contradictory from the start. He talks about, for example, the need to have free public or government-run grocery stores. This was tried in Florida, and it closed after less than 4 years. You need to have profit motive. You need to have incentives.
What's going to happen with Wall Street? I mean, the engine of global finance moved from London to New York.
Correct.
And now what's going to happen?
It's a major problem. And I got to say, the American Jewish leadership has really not handled this election in a tactful or strategic way because, yes, he's an anti-Semite. This is someone who has literally said that he sends his love to the Holy Land Five, which were convicted for acts of terrorism.
Yes.
This is someone who campaigns with Hassan Piker, who said America deserved 9/11. This
Yes.
is someone who says that anytime the neck of the New York Police Department is on you, it's really because of the Israel Defense
Laced
Force.
by the idea.
I mean, it's insanity. So obviously, he's an anti-Semite. That goes without saying.
Yeah.
But we don't have to talk about anti-Semitism because his policies in and of itself would be so wildly destructive if even a tenth of it or an iota of his policies were ever inflicted on the people of New York. That's what we should be focusing on, the fact that the policies are so bad. And when we just focus on the anti-Semitism and he's going to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu, which he does not have the authority to do, yes, it's an important issue and he's wrong for saying those things, but that's not going to sway most New Yorkers.
I agree with you, but don't most New Yorkers know that socialism is bad, proven to have failed, and that this guy, forget all of that. If you were a boss and somebody gave you this CV and said, well, he's never had a job, he's going to manage the largest organization, a huge budget, would you give the job of CEO to somebody with no experience, never managed a budget?
First of all, he did have a job. He was a rapper for his mom, so that's credit where credit's due.
Yeah, fair.
But I think one of the most interesting polls from this election was 60% of non-American-born New Yorkers support Zoran Mamdani, whereas Americans who are actually born in America, 80% of whom support Andrew Cuomo, which really goes to what the conservative movement post-Donald Trump have been saying in the last few years, which is it's not just we have to combat illegal immigration, which is obvious. We can't have a society where people flagrantly violate the laws, but we also have to be clear and careful about who are we letting into the country legally.
Yeah.
So, for example, how is it that Mehdi Hassan, who was a low-level contributor to Al Jazeera, who regularly espoused that non-Muslims, Christians and Jews and Buddhists are compared to cattle and pigs and monkeys, why was he granted a visa? Mahmoud Khalil, who lied on his own application, why was he granted a visa? Zoran Mamdani, who spent almost all of his formative years talking about the need to take down statues pertaining to American history, why was he granted citizenship?
Well,
so
Ilan Omar, who married her brother.
Right, exactly. So, of course, we're a country of immigrants. I'm a very proud first-generation American, and I actually said that as my first few words at my speech at the Republican Convention.
Where were your parents?
They're from England, and my whole family actually still lives in England, except for my parents, and they're paying the consequences for it. But point being, of course, we're a nation of immigrants, and we want legal immigrants, but we also want the right kind of legal immigrants. So people who not only support American values, that's obvious, that's the baseline, but also can contribute to the American economy, American society, and that's why, Jews, not only have we had it really good in the United States, but we're kind of well liked by other religions because we're really productive in the United States.
I always say that. We are productive. We contribute. We don't just build ourselves up. We actually contribute incredibly to whatever society we're in. And because that's part of our values. Those are Jewish values. Yeah. You contribute to your society and you build. We're builders. And to kind of throw that away and instead swap it for people who want to destroy society seems so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
That I don't understand where that dislike and hatred is coming from, but
I think it goes hand in hand with the political indoctrination at institutions of higher learning that purport that America, and often I remember actually there was a professor at Harvard who talked about in one of the classes how it's totally legitimate to spell America Amerikakka. Now that's a legitimate form of political expression to represent your disdain for we're living on stolen land. And of course at Harvard and all these institutions, they will have land acknowledgement that we're living on stolen land. So it goes hand in hand with teaching young people that not only is this country not particularly great, but this country is actually really wrong.
Yeah.
There was, I won't say his name because I don't want to give him any credit, but one of the leaders of the Palestine Solidarity Committee at Harvard, he spoke about, and this is a direct quote, the OG apartheid nation is the United States of America.
Well, Zoran Mamdani's father said that.
Right, exactly.
He said that the Nazis were getting the ideas from the Americans.
Exactly.
I mean, these people are nuts.
And it also shows their blatant moral bankruptcy and intellectual hypocrisy because they hate America as a concept, as a state, as an ideology, but then they also want to live in America and take all of take all of the benefits and take advantage of our country. So yes, we have to be very careful about enforcing federal immigration law. We have to crack down on illegal immigration, but we also have to be a lot smarter and tougher as to who are the people who are coming into our country. Because being in the United States of America, which is the greatest country on planet Earth, Israel is number two.
I agree with you. It's a
But
great
we have to be
country.
very clear that it is a privilege to come to this country. It is not a right.
So Shabbos, the question of questions.
Yes.
Do you have a political ambitions to run for office? You seem like a guy who could do very well, who could represent your constituents very well. You're so eloquent and you have your values. When can we see you in office?
Okay, I'll be very open with you. It's very therapeutic.
Yes.
So I was approached a few months ago by concerned citizens from a broad range of the political spectrum to run for Jerry Nadler's seat. Congressman Jerry Nadler is the ranking member at the House Judiciary Committee. When I testified in front of his committee, he actually fell asleep, so it would be a good revenge story. He's very old.
Yeah.
And the reason he's resigning is because he would probably lose his primary. And I considered it. I'm still sort of considering it, but to be very honest with you and your listeners, I'm probably not going to do it because that race will simply be a race to the bottom. Who is the most far left? Who is the most radical? Who is the most woke? The person who will win that seat will be AOC incarnated. And I am not willing to compromise my political values to win elections. So I'll be very honest. I am thinking about political office. I do think that I've been blessed to be given a platform, and I want to use that platform to help my community, help the American people, help the Jewish community. And to quote a member of Congress who was actually a Democrat, who I asked, should I be speaking at the Republican convention? This Democratic member of Congress said, you would be he literally said, or she, you would literally be stupid to not speak at the Republican convention, because if you can help your community, then you should be doing it. So if I can help my community through the World Zionist Congress, if I can help my community through building a coalition of young Americans who are taking on their institutions of higher learning, or if I can do it through elected office, then I probably will. But practically speaking, yes, I'm still a registered Democrat, but my party is almost unrecognizable.
Well, it's very sad to hear that, but I really hope, and I have a lot of faith, that you are going to be an incredible representative whenever you decide to be. Your country, your people will be very, very lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shabbos Kestenbaum.
Thank you. I appreciate it.